In China, people say mixed children are supposed to be smart. And definitely my granddaughter, Sophie, is smart. But Sophie wild. Sophie is not like my daughter, Natalie, or like me. I am work hard my whole life and fierce besides. My husband always used to say he afraid of me. And in our restaurant, busboys and cooks all afraid of me too. Even the gang member come for protection money. They try to talk to my husband. When I am there, they stay away. If they come by mistake, they pretend they come to eat. They hide behind the menu, order a lot of food. They talk about their mother. Oh, my mother has some arthritis, need to take herbal medicine, they say. Oh, my mother getting old, her hair all white now. I say, your mother hair used to be white, but since she died, it become black again. Why don't you go home, take a look? I tell them, Confucius say, the filial son know what color his mother hair is. My daughter, fierce too. She is vice president in the bank now. Her new house is big enough for everybody to have their own room, including me. But Sophie take after Natalie's husband's family. Their name is Shay, Irish. I always thought Irish people are like Chinese people, work so hard on the railroad. But now I know why the Chinese beat the Irish. Of course, not all Irish are like the Shay family. Of course not. My daughter tell me I should not say Irish this, Irish that. How do you like it when people say the Chinese this, the Chinese that, she say. You know, the British call the Irish heathen, just like they call the Chinese, she say. You think the Opium War was bad. How would you like to live right next door to the British, she say. That is that. My daughter have a funny habit when she win an argument. She'd take a sip of something and look away, so the other person is not embarrassed. So I am not embarrassed. I do not call anybody anything either. I just happened to mention about the Shay family an interesting fact. 4 brothers in the family, not one of them work. The mother, Bess, have a job before she got sick. She was executive secretary in a big company. She has handled everything for a big shot. You will be surprised how complicated her job is. Not just type this, type that. Now she is a nice woman with a clean house. For her boys, every one of them is on welfare or so-called severance pay or so-called disability something. They say they cannot find work. This is not the economy of the 50s, but I say, even the black people doing better these days, some of them live so fancy, you'd be surprised. Why the Shay family have so much trouble? They're white people. They speak English. When I come to this country, I have no money and do not speak English. But my husband and I own our own restaurant before he died. Free and clear, no mortgage. Of course, I understand I am just lucky. Come from a country where the food is popular all over the world. I understand it is not the Shay family fault. They come from a country where everything is boiled. Still, I say, she's right, we should broaden our horizons, say one brother Jim at Thanksgiving. Forget about the car business. Think about egg rolls. Pad Thai, say another brother Mike. I'm going to make my fortune in Pad Thai. It's going to be the new pizza. I say, you people too picky about what you sell. Selling egg roll not good enough for you, but at least my husband and I can say we made it. What can you say? Tell me. What can you say? Everybody chew their tough turkey. The title Who's Irish came to me very late. Of course, I have been preoccupied with identity pretty much from the beginning of my career. I can only say that I'm preoccupied with identity not because identity is such an important preoccupation to others, but because I am the daughter of immigrants, because I did grow up with a lot of cultural dissonance. The question of identity has been central to me. And of course, I've also always been interested in groups other than Asian Americans. I grew up in a predominantly Jewish American community, and for that reason was very interested in them. I am married to an Irish American, and I have many near and dear friends who are from other quote-unquote groups that don't seem so group-like to me, I guess, and there is a way in which I've been interested from the beginning in the way that those ethnic boundaries are really very, very fluid. And, it's clear to me by the time I got to college that, I was probably as much Jewish as I was Chinese. And And also that I think my husband has become sinicized somewhat over the years, and that I myself have taken in much of his culture also, such as it is, and so I've always been interested maybe in challenging those categories, and by the time I was done with the story, it did seem to me that this grandmother who starts out such a bigot and full of funny but perhaps somewhat cutting remarks, is in a different place and in a place where she's able to accept the honorific of being an honorary Irish, and it seems to me that's a wonderful thing and a very American thing. All characters are individual first and foremost. I don't think that any successful piece of fiction can start from any premise such as I am trying to represent an American, an Asian American, or an Irish American, or any kind of anything. I think that I have certain preoccupations, and those things arise naturally. But first and foremost, I am concerned with character, with the individuals as individuals, but also, I guess, maybe with their place in the world. And because I am interested in their interactions with society and with the world around them, their ethnicity becomes an important factor, almost regardless of whether I think it's important or not. People often ask me about my humor, and I think they imagine that it is something which I can turn on and off, and that I use it in this deliberate manner in order to, diffuse stereotypes, whatever. In truth, I am just funny. And my husband will tell you that I am funny when I go to sleep, I am funny when I wake up, and I am funny sometimes in my sleep. So it is really, it's not something, it's not a tool that I take out when I need it. It's simply the way I am. I will say, though, it does seem to have a particular use in my writing because I am interested in so many questions of ethnicity and identity, which are pretty loaded. And there is a way in which the humor, it's like everything is floating on a kind of sea where they can all move around, and things which perhaps would normally be crashing into each other in a very unpleasant way are suddenly able to float and be in different relationships with each other, hopefully with felicitous results. I don't worry so much about stereotype. People ask me all about that because I guess I know in my heart of hearts that I don't see the world in a stereotypical way, and so there is a way in which, if you ask me, well, is it a stereotype to have a Chinese American woman running a restaurant? A lot of Chinese Americans run restaurants. I will say that many Asian American characters who do not run restaurants. So I don't worry that in my mind all Chinese Americans run restaurants. I will say that probably not that many of them have the sense of humor that this grandmother does, and not that many of them are able to chase the gang members out the way that she is able to. So she, in one way, she has characteristics that you might say were generalizable into some kind of stereotype. But I think if you look a little deeper, that she's not a stereotype. And I guess I will say also that it seems to me that if one is interested, as I am, in writing about ethnic difference, that it's very important to characterize deeply, exactly because, 2D characters may take on the, shadings of stereotype, whether you like it or not. And that's not to say that, I have noticed that often even my secondary characters are quite round. which I will say is probably more a reflection of me and my interest in the world than it is about some sort of conscious artistic program. But as a writer, I am also aware that given the kind of risks I run in my work, given the fact that I am interested in writing about some things which are very loaded and very difficult, it's a lucky thing that I'm interested in characterization too, and that I do take such care with even my secondary characters. I must say that I think the character is absolutely sort of the font of all fiction. I mean, I think that's where the conflict comes from, and I think it's where the plot comes from, and that's where the story comes from. So I think that myself, if I feel that something is not going, that it doesn't have its own drive, I don't look at the incidents to try to understand what's going wrong. I look at the character. And in particular, I look at the character's ambivalence, you know. Faulkner said, you know, that stories are all about the human heart in conflict with itself. And it does seem to me that the human heart is always in conflict with itself, and that it is the fiction writer's job to understand the nature of that conflict and to make fiction out of it. So that, like I say, if a piece for me is not working, I will look to see, well, what is this character's conflict? What is this character's ambivalence? And is there some way maybe of making that more dramatic and sharpening that? When I was a younger writer, which was many years ago, I did used to have a system where I kept like a little notebook of index cards. So these were 4x6 index cards that were spiral bound. And that was a very useful way of keeping notes because, you know, after you write things down, you can tear them out and file them so that all of your thoughts about character, for instance, can be put in one place. I have to say that now that I'm an older person and more in need of such devices, I actually find that I have no time to take notes, I'm sorry to say, and do everything pretty much from memory. Or if I'm using memory, or I would say, that's to say maybe that I rely more heavily on my imagination than ever. If you're looking at to where the character, you know, to what drives the characters, right? So it's, you know, like I say, it's not something that I remember, it's not something that I've seen and jotted down, but it's often a feeling. For instance, in the story Who's Irish, it is true that when I was raising my children, that I often had the feeling that I was on a different program than many of my fellow mothers. That's to say that, you know, I could hear that, you know, I could hear both the voices, oh, this child is misbehaving, and oh, this child needs a good spanking. And I could hear both the voices that say, oh, you know, all children do this and it can't be helped, and a voice that said, this is totally unacceptable and no child in China would ever behave this way. And it is finally in the fact that I could hear these two voices that this, you know, I mean, it's the hearing of the two voices that gives rise to the story. So you'll sort of see that, you know, it's not anything that I wrote down. It's not that anything anybody did exactly. It's the day in, day out experience of dissonance that will give rise to a story like this. There are people who believe that that one can only write about members of one's own group, whatever that means. I have to say that I am not of that persuasion at all. In fact, quite the opposite. I feel that fiction is about crossing boundaries. It's about being able to understand and imagine other people's experiences. And I don't think that you do have to have grown up in people's particular historical, you don't think you have to have grown up with people's particular historical background in order to understand them. That said, I do think that it's important to do your homework. And I did write a book about a Chinese girl who turns Jewish, and, you know, I did my research, and it was a great moment for me when Jews came to me and said, oh, you know, I understood myself from reading your work. Actually, everybody thought I was Jewish after.
Yeah, they said, "I didn't know you were."
Yeah, well, so much so that I think that, very often, I was always asked, again, what are you doing for the high holy days? And when I said nothing, I felt lapsed. Then I had to remind myself that I'm actually Catholic. But, I don't think that it is a good thing politically or artistically to write about people that you don't understand. And I think particularly if you're going to write about their ethnicity, I think that you owe it to yourself to do some research. I think the same way if you're going to write about the 19th century, you don't just make it up. You try to do a little research, and you try to concentrate. You try to be aware that you are not writing about your own century, and that therefore you have to pay a little more attention. I do think that many people, when they think about writers, they think that writers are born, they think that writers know, from birth, I guess, that they were meant to be writers. And I do know many writers like that. I mean, I have many friends who will say that, that they got a typewriter for their birthday when they were 5, and that was what they wanted most of all. I was not one of those people. I am the daughter of immigrants. I had never known a writer. Not only that, I didn't have very many books. I had a godmother who sent me a book every Christmas, and I still remember she sent me Heidi and Little Women. Our household did not have a lot of books. I read Heidi like 500 times. I do know every word of Little Women. And I was in a Catholic school until I was in 5th grade. That school had a donation library. That meant that anybody who had books that they didn't much care for would give it to the donation library. It wasn't a lot of books, and the books were not very interesting. And so I really didn't even really recognize myself as somebody who loved to read until my family moved to Scarsdale, New York. When I was in 5th grade, and they had a real library, and so I did become kind of this wildly enthusiastic, if indiscriminate reader, and it seems ridiculous that it would never have occurred to me to write, but like I say, I just don't think that's a dream that people like me had even. Writing opens the world. And, it not only does it expose you to the thinking and feeling of people who are very much unlike you, but it exposes you to the worlds they live in, which are often very, very much unlike your own. And there is a way in which, because you only live in your world, you are not always aware of how singular and peculiar that is, and there is a way in which once you see other worlds, you begin to realize, oh, actually this world that I live in is not inevitable, actually it can be changed. Actually other people have lived differently, and that's a very important thing. I think also understanding other people is huge, and maybe even in trying on other selves. I do think that there is a way in which we are so trapped in our experiences that we fail to realize how many experiences there are, and that literature is an incredible view into that, besides being a great pleasure. I, at least, feel much more alive reading than I do living sometimes. I mean, there is a way in which, life itself can be kind of a disappointment, whereas literature never is.